All right, well, thanks for coming. My name's Kim Vandeveer. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering and director of the MIT Edgerton Center. So I want to thank you all for coming and for our panelists that you'll hear later after the film. And I want to recognize Chris Peterson here and Camilla Brinkman. The three of us got together a while back and came up with this idea of co-sponsoring this event. So that's special, particularly though, Chris is the assistant director of MIT admissions, and he was the one that really pushed the idea of doing this. So the ISEF actually began a long time ago, 1958. I think Japan, Germany, Canada, and the US joined together to hold the first international science fair. And today, students from all around the world participate in it. 40 to 50 students a year come to MIT who have participated in the ISEF. So, but you know, the feed, where do all they come from? There's hundreds, if not thousands, of regional and state science fairs. So many of the students at MIT have participated in those. MIT's been involved for a really very long time. The first state science fair in Massachusetts was in 1949, and it's been held at MIT every year. So this next spring, we'll be celebrating the 70th state science fair here at MIT. Now, engineering was not always a recognized category in science fairs, but that didn't stop a few intrepid students who really had an inspiration of something they wanted to do. One of those students was a young man by the name of Ed Moriarty, who works for me at the Edgerton Center. And in 1971, he took second place with his wind tunnel in a Pennsylvania state science fair before he came to MIT. Now, these projects that you do amazingly really stay with you for your life. Maybe in Ed's case, a little too much. We still have parts of his wind tunnel in a closet upstairs at the Edgerton Center today, almost 50 years later. So you'll find, those of you who have participated in these things, that the things you worked on and the things that you learn will follow you for the rest of your life. It's what brings students to MIT and what helps you go on from here to help make the world a better place. So with that, I would like to get the film started, and let's enjoy seeing. I hear some of the folks in the audience have a vested interest in people in this movie, so let's enjoy it.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Peterson. I am an admissions officer here at MIT, and I work really closely with the International Science and Engineering Fair. I want to thank you all for sticking around in the movie, and I want to briefly thank the panelists for being here. I know we're competing with rain, the World Series, and midterms. I also want to acknowledge that Anjali's mom is here, so hi. And other people who, the twins are here, other ISEF people who are in the audience. Yes, okay, cool. Also Franklin, everybody wish Franklin a happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
He doesn't even go here, but, and this is what he's doing with his birthday evening. So maybe we can just quickly go down and ask what I would really like, and we are recording this, but what I would really like is for the panelists to introduce themselves, you know, the usual sort of your year, what you're studying, and how you got involved with science fair.
Hello, my name is Doris. I'm a current sophomore here in the biological engineering department. I'm the screening face in the movie. How I got into science fair, I started doing research when I was in 10th grade, and then going to ISEF and then the Intel STS, those things were always my goals. And I somehow did go to ISEF during my senior year.
Hi everyone, I'm Afeefah. I'm also a sophomore in biological engineering. And the way I got into science fair, so I actually did my first science fair in 5th grade. It was like a mandatory school assignment. But I think starting from that age, I just loved the idea of like experiments and like testing things and kind of getting your hands dirty. And I started working in my first lab in 11th grade. And from then on, it's just been a journey with research.
Hi guys, I'm Madison. I'm a freshman considering studying chemistry and biology. And I attended DuPont Manual High School, which is the Louisville school featured in the movie, home of Anjali, and the 3 Louisville boys. And the science fair is required at Manual, so that was really my introduction to it. But I got a lab almost immediately, and I really fell in love with the research process, so that was kind of my gateway into science fair.
Hi, y'all. I'm Syamantak, freshman here, probably 6'2", electrical engineering, computer science. My introduction to science fair was my first grade teacher was really into science, and we did our first experiments in her class, things like squeezing bottles of water with packets of ketchup in them to see if they would float or sink. And from then, I have done science fair every single year from first grade to 12th.
Hi everyone, I'm Shinjini Ghosh. I'm from India. I'm a 22, considering studying maybe computer science, maybe maths, maybe linguistics. I'm a very confused person. And as for my introduction to science fairs, so it's not a huge thing in India as it is in the US. My school physics teacher kind of told me that there's this research competition you can just like apply to, and I guess things fell into place. I got selected to the nationals and ended up going to ISEF twice.
Hi, and I'm Scott Kominers. I guess I'm a 13th year student at MIT. So this is the imaginary number, the square root of -1. I never attended this excellent institution, although my brother did. I teach at the other school in Cambridge, both at Harvard Business School and in the Harvard Department of Economics. I was an ISEF competitor in 2005, and I now serve as co-chair of Mathematics Grand Awards judging. And I'm on the National Leadership Council for Society for Science and the Public, the nonprofit that runs the fair, as well as the Science Talent Search.
Cool. And so I guess one thing that I wanted to ask as a general question before we turn anything over to anybody, any questions anybody has in the audience, is if you could talk a little bit about a role that science fair has played in your life, and also something that you thought the documentary that we just watched captured about that science fair experience, whether about ISEF specifically or just science fair culture in general, and something that you thought it left out.
Okay.
Other than teaching you to do really cool things with your eyebrows, Doris.
No, I used to be able to do it better. I used to, my high school classmate, right? I used to do it. That was better. No, I haven't practiced. I guess one thing science fair really brought to my life is I came to the country when I was in 9th grade. I started doing science fair and science research stuff when I was in 10th grade. So during my first year, I was very shy. I had some accents. I didn't have a lot of friends, so I tend to not speak in class. But when I started doing science fair, I have to present and I have to talk to people. I have to speak in like lab meetings. I have to present my posters to the judges when it comes to competition. So doing science fair really forced me to speak and to communicate. So I think that's the most significant impact it had on me. And then what it didn't capture, I have seen this movie for so many times, and I felt like it definitely captures all the excitements, but not all the hardships.
Yeah, what was the first question?
A role that science fair has played in your life.
Okay, so I think I resonate a lot with Kashfia actually in this movie, in the sense of like I was raised by immigrant parents who were very orthodox, very conservative. I went to a small high school of about like 60 kids. And so I think for me, like getting into ISEF was nothing that I never expected to go to ISEF. I never thought I would. And I think when I did, it kind of was just like an introduction to this whole world of science and engineering that I wasn't aware of. And I think it just showed me what was out there, and if I pushed myself a little bit harder, where I could get. I think before that, coming to MIT was never on the table. And I think coming there and basically figuring out what all was out there is the biggest takeaway that I had. and yeah, I think it definitely captures all of the excitement. I remember I was like sitting there and I was watching like the award ceremony part, and I was like, wow, like it was nostalgia. Like I could feel how excited and like scared and nervous I was at that time. And I feel like I haven't felt that since I've been to college because I don't have a competition in my life like that anymore. And I think it very accurately represented that. The one thing I miss is that in this video, I feel like there's not a lot of focus on the interactions that kids have with each other, and I feel like that's one of the biggest takeaways I had was the friends that I made, the people that I got to talk to, and I feel like just because we were individually looking at kids, we weren't able to see how kids were interacting with each other as much. And yeah, Doris and I actually met during ISEF, and like I met Syamantak during, I think, Texas State Science Fair. So yeah, I think a lot of these interactions you get with people are very valuable. So yeah.
Yeah, so science fair definitely had a pretty massive impact in my life. So before doing research, I knew I wanted to go into a science career, like science really resonated with me, but I had no idea what that actually meant in the practical sense. So without actually doing research, it's hard to tell what that's like, you know, the ups and downs and if you'll enjoy it or not. So being able to do it as a high schooler definitely told me how much I enjoy that process and how I want to pursue it in the future. And actually going to ISEF, I didn't think I'd make it at all from manual. Vidya can attest to this, but actually getting there was a really validating thing. And then being able to present to professors and your peers definitely made me feel like a real scientist. That was like definitely a big impact in my science career. One thing I think the film shows really well is how big of an impact ISEF can have on your life. So it shows you know, the path that all these students take afterwards and how ISEF has changed them and really made them believe in the power of science research. And also the impact that science fair has on America and its future leaders. I'm a pretty big believer in that, and I think the film shows it well. One thing I think the film does miss, though, kind of like what Doris said, is the stress of it all and the negative aspects, the hardships that go into research. Especially coming from manual, which is a very competitive environment, it definitely was not always perfect. There was a lot of stress involved and there was a lot of cutthroat competition. But I think the ISEF fair itself, being there for that week, was a very stress-free experience. I think it was more getting there that was stressful.
For me, and I think this is something that was a bit of personal development also, especially given the classical perception of science fair as like purely a competition. But one of the reasons that I really started to enjoy and appreciate science fair as an outlet was that it's not just a place where you can do a project and try to compete with it, but rather you can pursue things that you want to do for the sake of doing them, and then potentially also apply them to a competition where you can get cool things and talk to a lot of cool people. And as a person for whom tinkering with things and taking them apart and rebuilding them is naturally something that's very enjoyable, that's something that I became able to pour a lot of time into with still like a prospect of recognition from that. And insofar as that goes, one of the great things that I found that the movie portrayed was the aspect of the fair in mingling with others and actually getting together with other people who are like-minded in doing research, whether that's for a competitive element or even for like a sense of camaraderie that you develop. Although one of the things that the film wasn't able to touch too hard on, which granted is a byproduct of the medium itself, is the extensive process that goes into developing these projects. Because for many of us, myself included, for example, the projects I did in my senior years took maybe 800, 900 man-hours for the whole thing. And so the amount of failure and work that goes into that and at every single step is really a ginormous amount if you put it in a scale.
I would very much agree with the fact that ISEF can be life-changing, because it was after I had come to ISEF once, and that I only considered applying to colleges outside of India. So yes, it effectively changed the course I was going to go through. And the one thing that the film captures very well is the anxiety and the nervousness of judging day and results. I mean, yes, it is horrifying. And the one thing that I feel it did not capture, but then it's not possible to do that in an hour and a half, is like the very different backgrounds that lead up to ISEF, because I could not relate with any of the background stories that were provided through this film. So yes, I mean, like all countries have their national fairs pretty differently. So I feel that was not captured by the film.
So first of all, I will echo all of these statements about how life-changing science fairs are, and trust me, it continues. I'm still friends with lots of people I met at the ISEF. Many of my students now are drawn from different science fair ranks, and it's really cool, and it goes on forever. I think the film captures really, really well. As you've said, is sort of the energy of the place and the environment. The production values of these things are like a huge contributor. And all of the social infrastructure, sort of like the network that's created, within and across years, is a huge part of what makes these things work and makes them carry on. Sort of when you get to college and beyond. Thing that we judges got basically no billing, but that's in part because no one's allowed in the room during judging other than the students and the judges. But something that you guys probably don't know, but when you all come back to join the judging panels, you'll see we are always blown away by the students. And there's this sort of like semi-trite thing that one can say, which is that the projects get better every year. This is actually the case, that like on the margin, the projects do improve. And if you look at like a 10-year gap, right, the period between when I was in the fair and when I like got my PhD and came back to judge, they completely transformed like everywhere. And like, we see the work. We know, like, we see this graduate level stuff that you guys are doing. We're like, wow. You're like, I'm not sure I could have done that in graduate school, much less, in high school. And there's no way to show that in the film, but trust us.
Cool. I want to take a little bit of an opportunity to see if anybody in the audience has any questions for any of the panelists. Yeah. Come down and use the mic for best practices since we are recording.
What was the biggest barrier you had to overcome in your journey through ISEF, like doing the research and everything?
There were a lot of barriers. For me, I think my biggest reason I still haven't really overcome that is I'm not a very confident speaker. So it's for science research, I don't know if she's studying the teacher, but Dr. McCall always says 50% is science, 50% is sell, right? I can do the science part, but I don't sell my idea very well. So when I was doing competition, I definitely had a lot of hardship, able just to make the judges be very interested in my things. I'm still working on that.
I think in relation to that, one of the biggest challenges I had was related to self-esteem, and that's not just like in the sense of presentation, but also doing research, because sometimes things don't work out the way you want them to, and it's really easy to like inflict that upon yourself. But I think like learning that sometimes things are beyond your control, and there are a lot of factors that come into where you are in life and where you're headed, is really important. And I think coming to that realization really helped me pull through.
Yeah, I would definitely say the biggest barrier was the research process itself. So I spent an entire summer just designing one experiment that was going to like make or break my entire potential future paper. And I spent like literally hours a day on this. And then I finally performed the experiment and it did not work for 4 months. And I was like heartbroken, like all this research I've been doing means nothing. I don't have, like, my hypothesis is not supported. And eventually it did work out, but there was definitely a period there where I was feeling pretty down on myself. I mean, I was convinced I would never make it to ISEF, or that all this work I'd been doing really wasn't to the goal that I had wanted it to be. So that was difficult to overcome, but I'm very lucky that it worked out for me.
So I'll actually take this question and break it into two parts. One is like quote unquote barriers, and the other is challenges or like obstacles. So in my experience, the biggest thing that I would term to be a barrier is just the problem of numerical statistics. So like numbers, I'm from Houston. Houston is a really big fair, and it's really like there are many quality projects too. Houston is a very scientific city. Like we have so many projects and so many good projects that Houston actually has more ISEF qualifiers than the Texas State Science Fair. And so numbers become a really big thing because like at some point, no matter how good your project is, right, it's just statistics that determines whether or not there are going to be
other projects that are also at that same tier, and you just don't make it into the final cut that makes it to ISEF, regardless of how good you or your work is. That being said, one of the things that I would say is more into like the challenge dimension of science fair, both as like a goal and as an institution, is the fact that it really stretches your boundaries, both in terms of what you can do, what you have to learn, and what you put yourself to. For example, in my project that I took to ISEF, the first time I went, I had to learn and apply biomedical engineering, biomechanics, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, computer science. I'd started out my project with no background experience in any of that. So I read like 400 papers that year and just had to try to learn and apply and utilize. And it was a big growing experience for me. And that eventually allowed me to do even better work the next year around and the year after that, which really hints at the cumulative growing process that isn't just reflective of science fair itself, but also about life and like science and scientific research in general.
So I'll completely agree with what he said, and like, that was like a main part of what I was going to say as well. So I'll also add something that, like, apart from, yes, I also started with like no background, and then like reading papers, like bunches of papers, going through many iterations and experiments. Also, other than that, a huge challenge for me was like convincing people around me that science fair is not a waste of time, because our colleges do not take into account whatever we do at science fairs or research or anything. It's just one single 8-hour exam that determines what college you get into. So while I was like also training for that in India, and at the same time convincing my teachers that to them it felt like me like putting time into research for science fair is basically not expressing my full potential for the examination, college entrance exams. So that was a hard time, and I would say I am lucky that it all worked out for me, because it would be like indeed very hard to also like prepare to that level, giving time to ISEF as well.
So I have no barrier I faced no barrier that serious or significant. I think the big thing was figuring out how to start in math research. I was very lucky. I went to a public high school that actually even had a research program, but it was essentially all focused around biology. We're right near the NIH, and so everyone would go to the NIH or some similar institution and do biology or biomedical research. And I wanted to do math. And there wasn't like a natural mechanism to do this. And through a combination of my extraordinary math teacher and my parents helping me figure this out, I got very lucky and got to come to a program actually here, the Research Science Institute, where they matched me with a math mentor. But before all of that, I went through like months of trying to figure out how to like get in contact with math professors. Like, most of them didn't have organized websites or anything. Like, there was a real chance I was never going to get to start simply because I couldn't find anybody to support the project. So in the end, I was extraordinarily lucky and it all worked, but it might not have happened.
Anybody else have any questions for the panelists?
So for Scott, I'm curious what the judges look for and what really distinguishes all these incredible projects. Like, how do you even begin to choose? And then for the panelists, what was the college application process like? I mean, this is an intense competition. Did you approach college applications in a similar mindset, or just how is that process? I'm curious. Thanks.
It's one of our admissions officers looking for some subjective intel.
You guys want to start, or should I? All right. What do the judges look like? Well, we think of it as very similar to college admissions. No. First of all, it is legitimately really hard. As I said, we tend to be blown away by a large number of the projects. and many of them are graduate level or even above. You're trying to understand a bunch of things. You're trying to understand what the project, sort of first the basic science, or in this case, often math of the project. How deep is it? How does it fit in with the rest of mathematics as a field? For this, we often, will have sort of experts in different areas that go and talk with the students and get a real sense of like, what the project is, and often have to then explain it to all the judges, right? There's like a process whereby, people will explain sort of like, okay, this plugs into this program and this part of algebraic geometry or something like that. So we sort of like give mini lectures back based on the work. And then, of course, you're looking to understand sort of the students' like engagement and sort of work in the project and general potential as a researcher, as a mathematician, or general scientist. And this you get through the conversations and, in the interviews. And then, and then on top of that, you sort of end up making some like funny apples to oranges comparisons, right? You're like trying to decide how does, some project in algebraic geometry compare to some, applied math project that's sort of like an incredible applied math project next to an incredible algebraic geometry project. And for that, there are like really complicated discussions. And luckily we have, a reasonably large number of awards to give out because, at some point there are a whole bunch of different projects and you're sort of trying to, you've sorted and organized them by fields. But luckily, like a lot of these things tend to be correlated, right? Like, all the students are amazing. The students who have like, done the deepest work often also have the deepest understandings of the work they've done in the field, and sort of they teach us stuff and then we try and teach it to each other.
Was the question something like, how did I approach ISEF versus
It was how
college
did
application?
going to ISEF change or impact your college admissions process, and or did you approach the college admissions process with a kind of research-oriented mindset that you'd learned from ISEF? Either one.
So yeah, I decided to apply abroad with ISEF as a big factor in that, and but the process of applying to colleges for me was like pretty different from ISEF. ISEF was something that I did because I love doing the work, and and I didn't really think of like having it come to use in college applications. And also like how I came into ISEF was not the standard science research way. It was more that I was at the linguistics Olympiad and some problem had my curiosity and I just looked into it, and then it came to the shape of a project and then like applied to the Indian National Science Fair. Whereas for college applications, I found out that yeah, it kind of actually comes to use in like US college applications. And yeah, so there were like very different processes for me.
I like to think that science isn't just a subject, it's a way of perceiving the world. And to that end, college, like applying to college and the whole college admissions process is tedious, it's boring. Research is often much more interesting inherently, but similarly, they both take hundreds of hours to do. And when it comes to essays, things like trials and figuring out what went wrong and then reassessing your test conditions and redoing things definitely helps a lot. So I sort of took like that sort of like a scientific approach to things like essay writing. I know a lot of my essays had draft after draft after draft that I'd just help, like I'd tear down and then revise, and that really helps not just like portray yourself in the best way possible, but also figure out yourself as a writer too. That helped me pursue one of like my creative outlets through like essay writing and also writing not just within the confines of essays, which is an interesting feedback loop, is something that I also find useful for research, is applying a little bit of creativity to things rather than just keeping yourself confined within the bounds of like conventional scientific quote-unquote wisdom.
I definitely think science fair shaped the content of my college applications at the very least, because research was definitely one of the most important experiences of my life, if not the most meaningful I'd had. So it was like a no-brainer to write essays about research and to talk about it as much as possible, because it really was a big part of who I was. And it was kind of a nice cherry on top of my application to have awards from science fair and to have a good research portfolio, because I didn't do science fair for the sake of college applications. I did it because I wanted to get a good experience and to publish. So kind of having that, that extra boost on my application was nice. And I will say during the actual process, when I got bogged down by writing essays, essay writing isn't my favorite thing in the world, so I would go to the lab and I'd do work, and it would be kind of like a creative outlet and my catharsis for the day. So it kept me from kind of getting burnt out and bogged down throughout the whole process.
Yeah, I think applying to admissions and science fair is similar in the sense that, like Syamantak said, they both take a lot of time, and you've kind of spent like, I don't know, a year for college or for 4 years of high school to apply to college, and you've like written it up really nicely, and you're like pressing the submit button, and you don't know what's going to happen. All you hope is that you've like impressed these judges, quote unquote, right? And I think in that sense it's pretty similar. But I think science fair definitely gave me content to write about, more so than about research. I think just the self-growth and self-reflection that I was able to do through science fair. And so in terms of answering questions that asked me to do that, I think I had stories and content to go back to, so it was helpful in that sense.
Okay, so for me, I did science fair competition throughout high school, and luckily, I applied and got into MIT before that year's huge competitions. So after that, I stopped. I never applied to other colleges, and I just focused on science competitions. Yeah, going to competitions and my science project and research definitely gave me a lot of content to write about in the essays. And maybe not everyone would agree to this, but I actually enjoyed writing the college application, the essay parts, not the SAT part. That would be bad. Yes, because I think I found a lot of things about myself when I was writing the essays. One thing I think it's very different between college application and the science fair competitions is that I started my college application like very, very early, and I write drafts after drafts, so every revision it's a little better. But for science competitions, I always feel like it's just one shot. It depends on your performance on that day. If that just wasn't a good day for you, it wouldn't end well. And if that day was just a particularly good day for you, it probably ended well. But college application is more like whatever you have done throughout the 4 years. It doesn't depend on this certain period that you're doing.
Any other questions? All right, well, we will, I want everybody to thank the panelists for spending some of their evening with us. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to MIT AV for the support here. Thank you to Kim and Camilla and the Edgerton Center for co-sponsoring with us. And thanks for coming out and supporting science. We'll see you all around.